City of Bones is the first book of Cassandra Clare's Mortal Instruments series, The Mortal Instruments, which is the introduction to her Shadowhunters realm, which is an urban fantasy world in which she's written several series, including a prequel to this one and a spin-off. So it's been pretty successful. This book came out in 2007, hit the bestseller list, was made into a movie in 2013. So we're going to dive into just this book and see what can writers learn from Cassandra Clare. Let's get going. Hello and welcome to Creative Writing Corner. I'm your host, Luke J. Morris, and today we are talking about Cassandra Clare. We're talking about her novel, City of Bones, which again was the introduction to her Mortal Instruments series and became a movie in 2013, didn't do so well, never became a movie series. They did turn it into a TV series, I believe in Canada, in 2016 and ran for 3 seasons. So if anyone's seen that, feel free to comment on how that is. I have not seen it. I haven't seen the movie version either, nor have I read any of the other books. So this is going to be a review of this book only, and there will be some spoilers. So if you're interested in reading the book, go read the book first before finishing this review. We'll get into spoiler territory a little later on. But let me give you a quick overview, my overview of the book. It's got an interesting premise and some decent world building within. It really does build a lot of interesting ideas in there. But the characters are mostly stock characters. I've heard that they get better and better developed later on in the series. My students, many of whom are teenage girls, the core demographic of this book, say that it gets better. The characters are a lot more likable, more well fleshed out, and the story itself becomes better later on. But this book has some weaknesses, and I think there's a lot of stuff that writers can learn from these weaknesses, and we're going to talk primarily about those, although I will give praise to the book where it's due. Mostly stock characters. It's got a very confusing plot with some unclear stakes. Like, it's really unclear what is the ultimate thing at stake here. What is being fought over? What's the goal? Where's the story going? We're not really sure. And it's got some very weird plot twists that almost feel like the author is crying out for attention, is intentionally reaching for shock value to grab attention. I don't know if that's the case. I can't read the author's mind, but that's what it feels like reading the book to me. So let's talk through the characters. So our characters are Clary Frey. Frey sounds like Fae, as in Fae or fairy, as in the world of fairy. And so Clary Frey, and I'm not sure what the distinction or what the connection is between Claire and Clary. Like, if I were to write a main character, I probably would not name him Norris, because it just sounds a little too close to Morris, but Cassandra Clare wrote Clary, whatever. Just not the way I would name my characters. But Clary is our protagonist. She's a teenager. She's just about to turn 16. We meet her like on the eve or the dawn of her 16th birthday. Her best friend is Simon. He's very much the classic beta male. Kind of nerdy, kind of geeky, follows around in Clary's wake wherever she goes. Obviously has a crush on her, although she sees him as just a friend, like a brother, which we all know is the hardest and most evil thing you can say to a boy. Jace is the one that Clary meets right off the bat. He is one of the Shadowhunters, and he's kind of the alpha bad boy who becomes the love interest, and later on something very, very else, and it's weird. We'll get there. But anyway, Jace is the other main character. Our lead couple is Clary and Jace, and then Simon is kind of a hanger-on, so that's our main love triangle. But we also have Alec, who is Jace's best friend, another shadow hunter, and we'll talk about what those are in a second. And of course, Alec is secretly gay. Jace does not know this. We find this out pretty early on in the book, though, through the main character. Isabel is Alex's sister, his hot sister. She's definitely hot, and she knows it. And she kind of has the hots for Jace. Of course, Jace himself is super hot, and he knows it. So there's that kind of trio there. Alec also kind of has the hots for Jace. So that's another love triangle that we've got going on. And then we've got Luke, or Lucian, that is Clary's mom's best friend, who is only a platonic friend, even though he's clearly in love with Clary's mom. We can definitely realize that from very early on. Has been like an uncle, kind of a father figure to Clary for all of her remembered life. Magnus is this warlock they go to for help, who sparks a instant romantic connection with Alec, which I guess will be explored in some future book because it doesn't get explored here. And then Valentine, who we don't meet until towards the very end of the book, but he's talked about a lot throughout the book, kind of like Voldemort is talked a lot throughout the Harry Potter book, even though we don't meet him until the very end of the first book. Similar idea. He's the big bad. He was a good guy, and then he turned bad. So now he's the big bad that everyone's afraid of. So those are the characters, and the summary of the plot. When her mom disappears and a demon tries to kill her, Clary must join a group of teenage demon hunters to fight back? I mean, she also has to recover a memory that's been stolen. It's unclear exactly what the stakes are. We know she wants to get her mom back, but that's not the only thing she's trying to do, nor is it everyone else's goal. So it's really hard to tell what the actual central conflict is. What is the core problem that we're supposed to care about? It's kind of hard to tell, and that is one of the flaws in the story. But let's talk about some positives first. I will give the story props where props are due, and there is some pretty cool world building here. It's very decent world building. It's a good setup. It's a modern day New York following teenagers in modern day New York City, but it's a New York with two worlds. It's got the everyday world that we know, and then it's got this underground shadow world. They literally call it Shadow World, where the shadow hunters reside, and the shadow hunters are half angel, half human beings, who we will later find out that Clary is one of them, even though she didn't know this whole time because her mom was keeping it secret from her. But of course her mom gets kidnapped, so that goes on. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this novel. A lot that happens. And it's very hard to keep track of all of it, which makes it very hard to care about all of it. There's also a lot of characters. We'll get back to my complaints. But again, the world building is pretty cool. It's got this whole gang of shadow hunters, and there are adults as well as teenagers, and they're all basically, their mission is to keep the world safe from demons, werewolves, vampires, things that stalk the night. The things that stalk the night, though, are not necessarily evil. They're just trying to exist. Some of them are evil, and those are the ones that need to get sent back to hell, and the rest of them are just trying to go about their day-to-day lives. There's not supposed to be an open warfare between mortals and angelic beings and demons, because if it does, it could destroy the world. But we find out a little later on that the big bad guy, Valentine, was actually a shadow hunter who went rogue because he wanted to wipe out all of demonkind. He's basically a megalomaniacal racist or speciesist. And he's very powerful. That's pretty much all we know about him. So he's the big bad, even though he's trying to kill the same people that the good guys generally are trying to kill. Which is an interesting twist, I have to say. Twisting the politics of it to make the good guys and bad guys kind of blur the lines between them. That is not a bad idea to do with stories. Matter of fact, it's a very good idea, and I highly recommend that you do try to blur those lines a bit. Having a hard and fast bad guy and a true staunch good guy rarely works 100% in story. I mean, yes, we had the staunch good guy that is Luke Skywalker and the staunch bad guy that is Darth Vader in the beginning of Star Wars, but we know how that ended up, right? The lines become blurred, and there's an overlap, and there's a transition there that's part of the entire story. Maybe that'll be part of this story down the road as well. Again, I have not read the future books. I'm only focusing on this one. The prose style of the book is not too bad. I've definitely read worse, particularly in YA lit and young adult lit. For a young adult book, this reads pretty well. It's not a masterpiece like, say, The Hobbit or The Chronicles of Narnia or A Wrinkle in Time are, where the prose style kind of matches up with the themes and ideas being presented. They're all brilliant things being portrayed in a brilliant way. It's not brilliant. It's not on that level, but it's enjoyable to read. It's not painful to read. So there are some other YA books I've read that are harder to slog through just because of the constant use of complex sentences or the overuse of particular words and phrases, and or just stylistic errors, just continual use of passive voice or adverbs that just drive a reader crazy because they take away from the joy and experience of reading. It doesn't suffer too much from that, so it's a readable book. So that's a positive. Decent world building, readable book. The point of view is pretty consistent. It stays in a close third-person point of view, a limited third to Clary's point of view. It does shift away from that to a more omniscient point of view numerous times, just to basically show us scenes where Clary's not there, which is not the best way to do point of view shifts. Just to, if you're going to stay in limited third, it's really a good idea to stay in limited third and not to show us things that the main character doesn't see, because building that mystery can actually help get the reader invested and get the reader wanting to continue on with the story. But that said, the POV shifts weren't jarring. They were at least scene by scene. You didn't have a POV shift right in the middle of a scene. There's actually a little break, so that's not terrible, and overall it's mostly consistent. And then the protagonist has a lot of room for growth. A lot. Clary, she kind of sucks when we first meet her. It's not necessarily terrible. You don't want your protagonist to have everything they need at the very beginning. You don't want your protagonist to already be perfect right off the bat, and all they need to do is learn that they are perfect. That's how you get terrible character arcs like Rey from Star Wars. Nobody wants to see that. We want a good character arc like Luke from Star Wars, or from, pretty much any other decent story that has a good character arc, like Michael from The Godfather, or like Rick from Casablanca. I like to pull movie examples out there, like Frodo from Lord of the Rings has a great character arc. Nick Carraway from The Great Gatsby has a solid character arc. So, lots of good character arcs out there. This character definitely needs an arc because she starts out way low. She's dumb. She does not have a lot of good traits going for her. She's hot but doesn't know it. Very standard for this trope, for this genre. So, protagonist has room for growth, which is a good thing, which means that we've got something to look forward to. We've got some kind of movement for her to do. So, the negatives. The negatives are bigger than the positives. There is a distinct lack of focus in this novel in terms of finding the central conflict. What is the central conflict? As I said before, is it supposed to be finding Clary's mom? Is it defeating Valentine, or Big Bad Guy? Is it killing off the demons? Because that seems to be what they spend a lot of time doing. It's hard to tell what the actual goal is here. Like, finding her mom seems to be the core thing, but that's not what everyone else wants. Like, everyone's got their own little agenda, but they don't all seem to fit in with each other, which it's okay to have conflicting agendas, but they don't fit in story-wise. Like, if half of the characters are pursuing a goal that has nothing to do with what the goal that the other characters are pursuing, and then these characters come over here and help these characters with their goal with no reciprocity involved, what's the purpose of that? So the confusion is part of the problem. The lack of focus brings a lot of confusion. There's also a lot of characters in this story. I listed the main ones. There's about a dozen more characters that we meet here, and I imagine that all of them are going to play a role in the story as it goes along. Again, there are 4 books in this series, and then there's a whole bunch of other spin-off series and stuff like that. So I imagine other characters are going to play a role, but we get introduced to these characters, and then they kind of just disappear, and we never see them again in the story. They're barely mentioned, and it raises the question, why are they there? Why have all these characters there? Well, so they're set up for later books. Well, that's not a bad point. That's not a bad idea, but for one, they don't always do that. For example, at one point, towards the climax, Luke, who turns out secretly, this is one of those spoilers, turns out secretly to have been a werewolf the whole time, which is very obviously foreshadowed early in the book. Clary finds it out, and it's like, oh, what a surprise for her. The rest of us are just like, yeah, we already knew that. But that's another thing. When you foreshadow, do it subtly, so that if a character is going to be surprised, the audience can be surprised as well. Because otherwise, the audience just kind of thinks that the character is an idiot, because we figured out something that she couldn't, which was also right in front of her face. So use dramatic irony when you need to. Like, have the audience know things that the characters don't know when it makes sense to do that, because that's definitely a good way to build suspense. But don't have the audience figure out something that's right in front of the character that the character can't figure out, because then we just think the character's stupid and we lose investment in her. So there are a lot of characters. I think narrowing down the characters here could have really helped the story out, because it would have given us some people to focus in on, and it would have helped us care about them more. So quality over quantity when it comes to characters. That's what this book kind of ignored, that lesson, and it suffers from it. To give you an example, at one point, again, Luke, he's a werewolf. He joins a pack of werewolves, kills the leader, so he becomes the leader of a pack of werewolves, so that they can join him to help Clary out in this rescue operation after Jace gets kidnapped by Valentine to go rescue Jace. And then we get introduced to the werewolves, we learn several of their names, several of them, they seem to have character traits, and then most of them just die. So we don't even have a chance to care about them yet before they die. It seems to be like a tragic situation where they're dying in front of us, but we've barely met these people. We have no reason to care about them. Even Luke doesn't have a reason to care about them. So there's no real stakes for him or for us reading about these people dying. So it's kind of pointless. It would be nice if, like, he had the pack the entire time, and it's only revealed that they're his pack later on, and then, you know, we've already gotten to know some of those characters, so there's an emotional impact when they die. But this book seems to try to steer away from those kinds of deep emotional impacts, and goes for more shallow shock value emotional impacts, and we'll talk about that in a second. Another big problem with this book, a lot of setup, very little payoff. This is what the character introductions come in to that. Again, the flirtation between Magnus, the warlock, and Alec, the shadow hunter, doesn't pay off in this book. I imagine it pays off in the future, but it doesn't go anywhere here. So many things are just set up, and hardly anything is paid off. Yes, this is a problem with first books of series. You always have to do some of that. You're going to have to leave some threads untied. You're going to have to leave some red herrings floating out there. It's necessary. But at the same time, look at when this has been done well. Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, The Hunger Games, even. Each one of those it was meant to be the first book of a series. So the first book ends with a to be continued. But each book still completed its own arc. Okay, Harry Potter doesn't defeat Voldemort forever at the end of the first book. Sorry if I'm spoiling that for anyone who hasn't read it. Go read Harry Potter if you haven't. At the end of the first book, he does beat Voldemort temporarily. He wins his goal in that book. He completes his journey for that book. He learns the lessons that he needs to learn to do it. So he has his little moments of character growth, and he accomplishes both the external and the internal goal. But it doesn't close off the story. The story is still going on, because Voldemort's still out there, the bad guys are still out there, the world is still a dangerous place. Things are only going to get worse for Harry down the road. And we know that at the end of the first book. At the end of this book, there is no such closure like that. There's no closure of her getting her goal or accomplishing anything. Her mom's still missing. Everything's still up in the air. We get some weird revelations toward the end. And this, well, when you introduce characters and situations for the sake of future books, make sure that they actually make sense in the book you're writing them in. Okay, so make sure that if you're going to introduce a character who's going to play a bigger role in a future book, give him a reason to be in this book at least. In this book, City of Bones mostly does that. Like, there's a reason for Magnus to appear in there. He doesn't just come out of nowhere. But at the same time, the book could very well have gotten away without him being there. And the fact that he's established as important and then plays no further role in the book is certainly a problem. So give characters a very good story necessary reason for being in the story. If a character does not have a strong story necessary to reason to be there, introduce them later on. You don't need to introduce all your characters in the first book if you're writing a series. Biggest problem with this book, though, number one problem, is it has an unlikable protagonist. This is not the death knell of a story. If you've ever read Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, is about the most unlikable protagonist that's ever been written. But that is, again, a best-selling novel, and that book actually is an interesting read. It's written in such a way that it's hard to read because it's written from the point of view of the psychopath, but it's an interesting read because the character is interesting. The protagonist is interesting. We don't necessarily relate to him, but we have a reason to get invested in him. With Clary, we don't really have a reason to get invested. She's not particularly interesting. All these accidental things that we find out about her. Oh, turns out she's actually a half-angel. Oh, it turns out she actually has some powers that nobody else has. Oh, it turns out she's some kind of chosen one. All of that's kind of thrown on her. She doesn't earn any of it, nor does she really do anything with it. She's continually having to be rescued, continually having to be saved, continually making stupid mistakes that none of us would make. Like, we read it and you want to reach through and just shake her and say, the right choice is obviously right in front of you. Make the right choice, but she doesn't. So she's a very frustrating protagonist to follow along with. She's hard to root for. She's not a very likable character, nor a very relatable character. She's very reactive, almost never proactive. Almost never does she go out and try to accomplish something on her own. She's continually reacting to what is happening to her. That is the opposite of a compelling protagonist. Your protagonist needs to be proactive, not reactive. So, some lessons for writers. By the way, I skipped over the big twist here, and this is something where it feels like the author here, Cassandra Clare, and I don't want to throw anything at her personally, I have no idea what her thought process was, but it feels like as a reader, she's kind of getting desperate for attention. Like, she wants something to grab someone's attention, something to make them remember the story. And so she throws a twist in here towards the end, which makes the story very memorable. And that twist is that Valentine, turns out the whole time, Valentine was actually Clary's father. So the big bad guy actually knew Clary's mom back in the day, and she ran away from the Shadowhunters to hide her from him. But then Clary's mom gets found, and she has to run away while Clary's out, and so Clary runs in with the Shadowhunters and everything like that. It all builds up. But Valentine, the big bad guy, is Clary's father, and he also happens to be Jace's father. We, of course, only find this out after Clary and Jace have had their romantic kiss in the hallway. Ew. Yeah, if you're getting little Star Wars flashback vibes here to Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi. Yeah, it's a little bit of that ewiness right there. But then, the way this twist was set up, I am almost positive that she's going to undo it later on, as well as some other twists. Like, I'm pretty sure Luke is actually Clary's father. I don't know if that's true. I'm just conjecturing from this. I'm pretty sure that Clary and Jace are actually not related, and they are going to be an item later on, and Simon's just going to be desperate and sad unless he gets with Isabel for some reason, because, why not? Anyway, so just some frustrations about the book there. So focus the story on one clear central conflict. Don't overload it with world building to the detriment of your story, to the detriment of your plot. Limit your characters to the numbers who are necessary. So number one, focus the story. Number two, limit your characters to the ones that are necessary for the story. Do not include characters in your story just to include them, just in case you might want to have them play a bigger part in a future story later. Just throw them in this story. No. Include only the characters who are necessary to the story. If a character is not necessary to the story, they're superfluous and they need to go. They're just going to be a distraction. They're going to take away from the story as opposed to adding to it. 3, have an arc. Okay? Have some kind of change that the character must go through, some kind of growth and some type of lesson that the character must learn. This is your protagonist. And by the way, you should have one central protagonist. That's going to help you have one clear conflict. At least the book does that. It's only got one protagonist. She's not a very good protagonist, but at least there is one. So have one protagonist with a central setup and payoff to invest in. This character needs some kind of payoff. There's something, they've been set up with something. There's something lacking that this character needs to accomplish or needs to gain, needs to do. So how are we going to make up for that lack? Or how is the character going to fail to make up for that lack if it's a tragedy? And don't overload the read up with a whole bunch of setups, introducing new characters, introducing new problems, and then the whole world's like a big spider web with no connections, a whole bunch of hanging threads. Story's over, see you in the next book. No, it's not good. It's not satisfying. You're not going to give anyone a reason to read the next book, which is why I haven't read any of these other books. I read this one back last spring, and I'm probably not going to read anymore because it just didn't grab me. Like, I was able to finish the book, but I really had to struggle to get through the last couple hundred pages. It took me a few weeks, and normally I go through YA Lit like that. So needs a lot of work. And apparently Cassandra Clare became a better writer as more of her books were published. This one was published 15 years ago. It's been a while, so hopefully her books that she's publishing now are of a higher quality, more catchy, more memorable, but who knows? The number one lesson to take away from this is give us a reason to care about your protagonist. Why should we care what she says or does? Why should we care about her? Why should we invest our time with your protagonist? Because remember, the audience is investing their time. The reader is investing his or her time to follow your protagonist and to basically vicariously do what your protagonist does, to experience what your protagonist experiences. If your protagonist is purely reactive, just getting hit with stuff and just trying to react to it, readers are going to get bored pretty soon, because we want to invest with somebody who's got somewhere to go, who's trying to get somewhere, who wants to do something, who has a goal in mind and is trying to accomplish it. We're not trying to go along with somebody who's just getting by, who's floating along. It's okay to start a character out like that. They start a character out like the dude from The Big Lebowski, but even he had a challenge very quickly that he had to proactively act upon. Oh no, my carpet's ruined that brought the whole room together. He's got to go see The Big Lebowski. That action is what kicks the whole story into motion. If he never takes action, the story never gets going. It's the same thing with this. This story really shouldn't have gotten going because she doesn't really take action. She sort of does when she walks in on this murder thing happening in the club. This kind of sets up the whole premise, but that's not it's not enough. Right? We don't really see her being self-driven or self-motivated. We just see her kind of in response. So you want your character ultimately to be relatable, not hateable. Give your character believable motivations, believable drives, and believable traits. And give her some drive, some reason for us to invest. Give us a reason to want the best for her, to want to see her win out. And that's going to help you a lot. The problem with Clary in this book is I just don't care. I just can't possibly see my way to care about her. Also, don't make your two main love interests siblings. I really don't recommend that. There are no rules in writing. You can do what you want, but if you do that, that's going to be an issue. You're going to have to deal with it. So if that's what you want to write about, go for it. But otherwise, try to steer clear. So focus your story on one conflict, limit your characters to those who are necessary, have an arc, make sure there's something that changes overall, and make sure that we have a reason to care about your main character. Your main character cannot be a hateful, miserable do-nothing. And that's what I've got to teach you. So that's what you can learn from City of Bones. It's not that I don't recommend the book. I think if you enjoy this type of YA novel, this type of YA urban fantasies, I think this could be a pretty decent book for you. Certainly could be a decent series. I can't say anything else about the series. But this book leaves a lot to be desired. And if it does improve, then maybe the series pays off. But as of right now, it's still a pretty good read just to learn things not to do, just to test your own skill as a reader. How well are you at reading like a writer? Can you spot all the flaws in a book and figure out how to make it better when you write your own? That's a good skill to develop. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. This was my review of Cassandra Clare's City of Bones. Go ahead, if you have read it, or you've read the whole series, or you've seen the movie or the TV show, please let me know what you think in the comments below. Please make sure to like the video and subscribe. So we're on YouTube terms here, but I'd really appreciate that, and I will deliver more content as soon as possible. Keep on writing, my friends. Peace.